The old Asylum tower visible for miles. A Lakota chief climbed it and carried her down. The rope was old. That's the first thing I noticed, older than the tower itself. Maybe braided buffalo hide gone gray and stiff at the loops where it had rubbed against the iron ring for 40 winters or more. Someone had left it coiled on the third landing, and I had climbed past it twice already without touching it. On the way up the second time I stopped and put my hand on it. The hide was cold. Colder than the stone walls, colder than the November air coming through the gaps in the mortar. I don't know why I stood there with my hand on a dead rope in an empty building in the middle of the Dakota Flats. I know that I did. That was the morning I found her. But I should say what the tower was first, because people who weren't there can't picture it, and people who never went inside. It stood at the far edge of what had been the Millard Asylum grounds, a place for disturbed settlers, built in the 1850s, abandoned by 1867 when the government moved its problems somewhere else. The main building burned in 71. The tower didn't. Stone doesn't burn the way timber does, and whoever built that tower had used good stone, dark granite hauled from 40 miles south, mortared tight. It rose maybe 8 stories from the flats, and you could see it from so far out that wagon drivers used it as a waypoint even when they had no intention of stopping anywhere near it. My people called it something that translated roughly as the place where the mad ones were kept. We did not go there for ceremony. We did not avoid it either. It was simply a place on the land, the way a dry creek bed is a place, or a lightning-struck cottonwood. It was there. It had been there before I was born and would be there after I was gone. I had come to it that morning because I had nowhere else I was needed. That is the truth of it, and I have not said it plainly to many people. I was 61 years old. My wife, stands looking, had been in the ground for 2 winters. My sons had gone north with the agency people after the Black Hills business, not willingly, but they had gone, and a man cannot follow his grown sons as though he is a dog following a horse. My band was smaller than it had ever been in my memory, and the men who were left, the good ones, the steady ones, were already looking to younger leaders. Not because I had failed them. I think they respected me still. But there is a kind of respect that is also a goodbye, and I had been receiving it for the better part of a year. I had a horse. I had a rifle that had been my father's, a Winchester 66 with the brass receiver gone dark from handling. I had a bedroll and enough dried meat for 4 or 5 days. I had been riding alone for 6 days before I came to the tower, which tells you something. I was not planning to climb it. I had made camp in the ruins of the old Asylum outbuildings. There was a partial roof over what had been a laundry room, and the walls cut the wind, and I had woken before dawn with the cold working through my blankets. I'd built a small fire and sat with my back against the stone and watched the sky go from black to the color of ash, and somewhere in that watching, I decided to climb the tower. I don't know why. Sometimes a man does a thing without the reason arriving ahead of the doing. The door at the base had been off its hinges for years. Someone had dragged it to one side and it leaned against the wall there at an angle, and I ducked under it and went in. The staircase was stone, winding, with a rope strung along iron pegs in the wall for a handrail. Several of the pegs had pulled free and the rope hung slack and useless between them. I climbed anyway. First landing, second, past the old buffalo hide rope on the third, on up to the 4th and 5th and 6th, and what I figured was close to the top. There was a door on the 7th landing, iron-strapped oak heavy, and it was shut. I had passed 3 open landings below it with nothing in them but old straw and a broken chair, and some kind of bird nest gone gray and shapeless. This door being shut registered in my body before it registered in my mind. I stopped 2 steps below it and stood still and listened. Inside, breathing. Not even that at first. Something quieter than breathing. The kind of stillness that a living thing makes when it is trying very hard to be nothing. I put my hand flat on the door. Old oak. No movement in it. I said in English because I was on settler land, and if there was a person in there, it was most likely a settler person. I said, "I'm coming in." I pushed the door open. She was in the corner farthest from the door, sitting on the floor with her knees pulled to her chest and a wool blanket pulled tight around her shoulders. She had brown hair gone loose from whatever she'd had it in, and it hung across one side of her face, and she was looking at me over the top of it with eyes the color of creek water in late summer, that gray-green-brown that doesn't have a name. She wasn't young. Mid-40s, I thought, maybe 50. Her face had the look of a face that had been outside in hard weather for years and knew it. She had a shotgun across her knees. Small gauge, short barrel. Her hands were on it, but she hadn't raised it. We looked at each other. "You're not one of them," she said. Her voice was flat and dry, the way voices get when a person hasn't drunk water in a while. "I am alone," I said. "I am not with anyone." She watched me for a long moment. Then she took one hand off the shotgun and pressed it against the wall beside her to push herself up and couldn't do it. She tried twice. The second time her jaw set and she tried harder, and her legs didn't answer her. She looked down at them like she was surprised by something she already knew. "My feet," she said. "I can't feel them much." I came into the room. She tracked me with her eyes but did not raise the gun. I crouched down a few feet away from her and looked at her boots. They were soaked through, dark with water, stiff, already beginning to freeze at the edges. "How long have you been here?" I asked. "Night before last," she said. "I was trying to reach Morrow's Creek before the weather came. I didn't." I looked at the single small window. There was a wooden shutter over it and she had it latched, but wind was still coming through the gaps and the room was not much warmer than the staircase below. On the floor beside her was a canteen, empty, and a canvas bag with what I could see was a bit of hard bread and nothing else. "The storm passed yesterday morning," I said. "I know it. Why did you stay?" She looked at the window for a moment and then back at me. "Couldn't stand," she said. And I thought, I don't know what I thought. I thought if I rested another night I'd be able to. I reached over and took hold of her right boot. She stiffened but didn't pull back. I unlaced it and pulled it off and peeled the wool sock away from her foot. The foot was very white, and the toes were the color of old tallow, waxy, pale, with a purple edge creeping in at the nail beds. She looked at her own foot for a moment without expression. "Is it bad?" she asked. "It is not good," I said. I held her foot in both my hands and began to warm it. This is not something you rush. You hold the foot and let the heat from your hands move into it slowly, and then after a time you rub gently at first, then with more pressure as the color starts to come back. It took a long time. She made no sound, but her breathing changed when the feeling started returning, a sharp intake and then a held breath and then a slow release. I worked on the second foot. When I had some color back in both of them, I pulled the dry pair of socks from inside my own shirt. I had been wearing them against my skin to keep them dry, habit from winters long past, and put them on her feet. Then I put her boots back on loosely, enough to keep the warmth in. She was watching me the whole time. "I'm me Corbett," she said. "I had a homestead out past the tower 10 years. She paused. "I say had." "The winter took it," I said. "My husband died in August. Then the mortgage came due, and I didn't have what I owed, and the bank sent a man." She said this evenly, the way people say things they've said to themselves so many times the words have worn smooth. "I was going to my sister in Morrow's Creek. I have nothing else to go to." I nodded and said nothing. "What's your name?" she asked. "Sleeping Bear," I told her. "It is the name I was given as a young man, and it is the name I have gone by since. In the years after the wars, some of my people took white names at the agency's suggestion, but I did not. I had not done it from stubbornness, exactly. It was more that the name was the last thing that still felt entirely like mine." "Sleeping Bear," she repeated, not imitating me, just saying it, the way a person says a new word to see how it sits in the mouth. I heated water from her canteen over a fire I built from old straw and timber scraps in the center of the room, on the stone floor, and fed the smoke out through a gap I made in the shutter. I had dried meat in my coat pocket, and I gave her most of it. She ate without embarrassment, which told me she was hungrier than she was letting on. I gave her water and she drank slowly, which told me she knew enough about cold weather thirst to be careful. When she was done, she leaned her head back against the wall and looked at the ceiling. "How did you end up at this tower?" she asked. "I was riding," I said. "Where to?" I thought about saying something that would sound like a direction. "I did not have a where," I said. She looked at me. "My wife died," I said. "2 winters passed. My sons have gone north." "And your people?" "Still here," I said. "But a man can be still with his people and yet not with them." She was quiet for a while. The fire popped. Outside, the wind moved across the flats with that low, sustained sound that sounds like something breathing just outside the walls. "My husband was a good man," she said. "Not exciting, not the kind of man that stories get made about, but he was steady and he worked hard and he was kind to me in the ordinary ways every day." She stopped. "Those ordinary ways add up. I didn't understand how much they added up until there were none." I said yes. Just that word, because I knew exactly what she meant. Stan's looking had a way of touching my shoulder when she walked past me, just a brush of her hand. She did it without thinking, I think, or maybe with thinking, but the kind of thinking that has gone so deep it doesn't feel like thought anymore. It was just what she did. And it was just what I had not had in 2 years, and the absence of it was a physical thing, like a cold room in a house that used to have a fire. We sat with that for a while. I put more wood on the fire. "Can you walk?" I asked her after a time. She considered this seriously. "Not down 8 flights of winding stone stairs in the dark." "It is not dark yet," I said, "and I have done those stairs twice today already. They are manageable." "My feet." "Your feet are better than they were. They will get worse again if we stay another night." She thought about this. She had a kind of practical intelligence in her face. You could see her working through it, not dramatizing it, just measuring. "And then what," she said, "if I get down?" "I have a horse." "1 horse." "1 horse will carry 2. She looked at me straight. "To where?" "Morrow's Creek is a day and a half west," I said. "Less, moving at a walk. Your sister is there." She looked at the canteen and then at the window and then at her hands. She had the hands of a woman who had worked a homestead for 10 years, not rough exactly, but shaped by it, the way a handle shapes itself to the hand that grips it every day. "All right," she said. I helped her to her feet. She put her hand on my arm and she was steadier than I thought she'd be. Not steady. Her legs were weak and her feet were still partially numb. I could tell by the way she placed them, but steadier than she'd credited herself. We went to the door and I went first down the stairs and she came behind me with one hand on my shoulder. On the 3rd landing, I stopped at the old rope. She stopped behind me. "What is it?" "Nothing," I said. But I stood there for a moment looking at it. I had stood there that morning with my hand on it and felt the cold of it. I understood, standing there in the afternoon light coming through the aeroloop windows, that I had stopped on this rope twice because some part of me had recognized something in it. Old. Gray. Stiff at the joints where it had bent for too long. Left coiled in a cold place where no one came anymore. I walked past it and did not touch it. We got to the bottom. The door. The gray November light outside, flat and thin but real, and the sound of my horse where I had tied him to a ring in the old stone wall. She stood in the open doorway for a moment, not dramatically, not to mark the moment, but because after 2 days in a stone tower in the cold and the dark you stop for a moment when you come out into the open air. You can't help it. "God," she said, just that, quietly to herself. We walked out to the horse. I had my hand under her arm because the ground was uneven and frozen and her feet were still unreliable, and she did not make any comment about needing it or not needing it. She just walked. At the horse she stopped and looked at him. He was a red roan, big for a reservation horse, with a white sock on the left foreleg and a look about him that was calm and interested. She put her hand on his nose and he pushed against it slightly. "Good horse," she said. "His name is Kettle," I said. She looked at me. "You named your horse Kettle?" "My daughter named him," I said. "She was 5. "Where is she?" she asked, and then immediately, "I'm sorry, I don't mean to." "She died at 7, I said. "A fever." Me Corbett put her hand back on the horse's nose and was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," she said again. "It was 14 years ago," I said. "I still talk to the horse by that name because she gave it to him." Me nodded slowly. "Of course you do," she said. There was no pity in it, just understanding, the recognition of a thing that made sense. I helped her up onto Kettle's back and then mounted behind her, and we rode out from the tower and onto the flats. The country west of the tower is flat enough that you can see the horizon as a clean line and watch the light changing on it for miles. In November it goes through a certain kind of color late in the day, not quite pink, not quite orange, something between them that has no name in English, and in my language we call it the color the sky makes when it is tired. That is not a direct translation, but it is the feeling of it. The sky making the color it makes when the work of the day is done and night is coming, and there is nothing to do but let it. We rode in that light for an hour before she said anything. "My husband used to say that this country would kill you if you let it," she said. "I always thought he was wrong. I thought the country didn't have any opinion about you at all, that you could die out here just as easy as you could survive, and the plains would be the same either way." "That is true," I said. "I know it is," she said, "but I understand what he meant now. It's not that it wants to kill you, it's that it doesn't care either way, and for some people that's worse." I thought about that for a while as Kettle walked. "When I was young," I said, "my father told me that the land is not indifferent. He said the land is patient. He said there is a difference between a thing that does not care about you and a thing that is waiting." "Waiting for what?" she asked. "For you to pay attention," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think I like your father's version better." We made camp when the light was nearly gone, in a dry creek bed that cut below the wind. I had enough dried meat for that night and into the next day. Me had her bit of hard bread which she split in half without asking and handed one piece back to me. I took it. We made a fire. Not a big one, enough for warmth and enough for the smell of wood smoke, which does something for a person on a cold night on an open plain that is hard to explain but real. She told me about the homestead. 10 years of it, the years the wheat came in and the years the wheat didn't, the well they dug in the second summer, and how her husband had gone down into it by rope to pull out a stone that had jammed the digger, and how she'd stood at the top holding the rope and being more frightened than she'd ever been before or since. She told it plainly, with detail, the weight of the rope in her hands, the sound of his voice coming up out of the dark of the earth. I told her about the summer I had led a party of young men north to trade with the Crow, who were our old enemies, and how the negotiation had taken 3 days and no one had thrown the first punch, which everyone had expected someone to do, and at the end of it we'd ridden home with horses and the Crow headman had ridden with us for 2 days just to make the point that it was done. I had been proud of that. Still was. "You kept the peace," she said. "I kept one piece of it," I said, "for a time." She looked at the fire. "That's all any of us can do." We slept not close to each other but close to the fire, and I woke twice in the night to feed it. The second time I woke she was already awake, sitting up, arms around her knees. "Can't sleep?" I asked. "Thinking," she said. "What about?" She looked at the coals for a moment. "You said you had nowhere you were going," she said. "Yes. That first morning, before you found me, You were just riding." "Yes." She turned and looked at me. The firelight was low and red, and her face in it was serious, not worried, not accusing, just very direct. "Were you going to come back?" she asked. "I mean to your people, to anyone." I looked at the fire. "I don't know," I said. She nodded. She did not look away. "I thought so," she said quietly. She reached over and picked up a stick from the ground and turned it in her fingers, not throwing it on the fire, just holding it. "My husband didn't want to die," she said. "He got sick in June, some kind of fever that came and didn't leave, and he fought it for 6 weeks. He was so angry at it. He would lie in that bed and argue with his own body like it was a bad hired hand." A pause. "He wanted to stay. He wanted more years. He wasn't ready." She put the stick carefully on the coals. "You are still ready," she said. "You're just very tired." The fire took the stick, and for a moment there was a small bright flame, and then it settled back to red. "Yes," I said, "that is right." "I know tired," she said. "I was in that tower for 2 days, and I didn't try very hard to figure a way down. I kept telling myself it was the feet, but the feet got better partway through the first day." She looked at me. "I think I was waiting." "For what?" "I don't know," she said. "Something, someone, proof that there was a reason to go back down into the cold and keep walking." The coals shifted. The sound the fire makes when it's burning low and solid, not crackling, just breathing. Kettle stood 15 feet away, asleep on his feet, one hip cocked. "I came up those stairs to find you," I said, "but I don't think I knew that yet." She looked at me for a long time. Then she reached across and put her hand on my arm, not my sleeve, but my arm beneath it, her fingers around the forearm just above the wrist, and she held it there. She had warm hands, which surprised me given how cold she'd been. "You came up those stairs," she said, "because you still had something left. You just didn't know what it was yet." She didn't let go. I did not move. In a while she took her hand back and lay back down and pulled her blanket over her and looked up at the sky, which was clear now. The stars hard and white the way they get in November when the cold has wrung all the moisture out of the air. "Tomorrow night I'll be at my sister's," she said. "Yes." "Will you stay in Morrow's Creek? There's a settlement, not big." "I haven't decided," I said. "My sister has a barn," she said. "It's warm. Her husband died 4 years ago and she runs the place alone. She could use a hand who knows horses." I was quiet. "I'm not asking you to decide tonight," she said. "I'm telling you there's a place if you want it. A reason to come back down off whatever high ground you've been sitting on." She said it without drama, without asking for anything back. Just, here is a thing, here is a door. I lay back and looked at the same stars. "Go to sleep, me Corbett," I said. "Already planning on it," she said. We rode into Morrow's Creek the following afternoon, late, the sun already going. A settlement of 20 or 30 buildings, a main street, a general store with a porch, a church, a livery stable. Her sister came out of a small house at the end of the main street before we'd stopped, a taller woman with the same straight way of standing. They held each other for a long moment in the cold, not saying anything, and I sat on Kettle and held his reins and looked at the livery stable across the street. Me pulled back from her sister and turned to me. She had come around to my side of the horse, and she stood looking up at me with her hand on my knee, not gripping it, just resting there, the way you put your hand on something to keep your balance. "Sleeping Bear," she said. I looked down at her. "Come back for supper," she said. "My sister cooks a good stew. I know because I ate it for most of my childhood." Her sister, behind her, had a look on her face that was trying not to be anything in particular, and not quite succeeding. I looked at me Corbett in the late afternoon light of a November day in a small settlement on the Dakota plains. She had a bruise along her left cheekbone from where she'd hit the tower wall in the dark. Her hair was still loose. She had my dry socks on her feet inside her ruined boots. She was looking up at me with those creekwater eyes, and there was something in them that was plain enough to read if you were willing to look at it. She had climbed that tower in the middle of a storm with 10 years' worth of failure in her hands and nothing on the other end of her road. And she had sat in that room for 2 days, and when I came through the door she had not raised the gun. And when she looked at me in the dark of that dry creek bed and said, "You are still ready, you are just tired," she had not been performing kindness. She had been telling me what she saw, which is what a person does when they see you. "What time?" I said. A corner of her mouth moved. "6," she said. I rode to the livery. I paid the man there to take kettle for the night. I washed my face and hands at the pump in the yard behind the stable. Then I found a fence post in the last of the sun and sat on it and looked west at the plains and the sky going through that tired color again, the nameless one. And I stayed there until the lamplights came on in the windows along the main street, one by one, until the whole small settlement was lit up warm in the dark. Then I walked to the end of the street. I knocked on the door. It opened. Inside was warm and there was a fire and the smell of stew, and me Corbett stood in the doorway with the light behind her, and she stepped back to let me in. I went in.